So today, Albert and I are driving in one of my true loves within the BMW range, the E46 BMW M3. This is the M3 produced between 2000 and 2006, 2007. And it's a very special car in my mind. When it was first released, the numbers were remarkable. People couldn't believe that a 3.2 litre engine was producing 333 or 340 horsepower, more than 100 horsepower per litre. But that's what it was doing. And that was remarkable because only super exotics of the time could produce more than 100 horsepower per litre. And to put that in perspective, the Porsche 911 of the time, the 996, was producing 320 horsepower from a 3.6 litre engine. And I even remember at the time Porsche engineers being interviewed for Car Magazine saying, oh yeah, anyone can produce 100 horsepower per litre, but the engines will never last. Well, here we are, 15, 20 years later, and the engines have lasted. BMW did a magnificent job with these engines. Some of the other neat features about the E46 at the time were, of course, that it was such a different car than the base model. Previous in the E36, you could put the little mirrors on and an M3 badge on a 328 and it looked pretty much identical to an M3. Not so with the E46. Of course, you've got the little slits on the side, you've got the different bonnet, you've got the 4 exhaust at the back. There were so many changes. And of course, this car also introduced the variable red line, which we see in all M cars these days. So back in the early 2000s when this was released, I was so envious of this car. I had a friend that had this car. And at the time I had an Audi which also had a 3.2 litre engine, but my Audi only produced 250 horsepower. This car had almost 100 horsepower more. My friend used to just kick my ass all over the highway. And so this is still a fun car to own today. Obviously 333 horsepower, a lot of family cars have that sort of power these days, but what you're getting is the sound of that engine, the short throw in the gearbox if you get the manual gearbox. Let's not talk about the SMG for now. And everything else that's BMW M3, you know. The steering from back these days was something special, and just the way the car does everything. You know, it's still so tight, even though this is a 20-year-old design. Even the interior looks pretty good for a 20-year-old design. And of course, things are far more simple 15 years ago. There's not any of the active suspension or any of the other nannies. Of course, you have to blip the throttle yourself between changes. In fact, I think the only adjustable thing is the sport button. And the sport button doesn't actually increase the power. In the E90, of course, you get the power button, which also didn't increase the power, just changed the throttle mapping, so it's a little bit more responsive. So what do you expect to pay for the real deal E46 M3 experience? Well, you can get them for between $15,000 to $20,000. This car that I'm driving today is a 2005, so it's a post-facelift edition with low mileage, so you'd expect to pay over $20,000 for one like this. I personally wouldn't get one of the cheaper ones, one of the $10,000 to $15,000 ones. They can be found, but you're going to spend another $10,000 or $15,000 just getting them back on the road. You know, older M cars cost money to keep on the road. Make no mistake. The most common problems with this model were cracks in the subframe at the back, where the suspension's pushing through the metal, and you'd pay $2,000 or $3,000 to get that fixed. But generally the engines have been pretty good. But yes, you're going to see an engine check light from time to time in any older BMW, so you need to budget for that. If you buy one of these for $15,000, spend another $5,000 to $10,000 getting it back to great condition again. And this car has the much more sought after 6-speed manual gearbox, which is a sweetheart. It's not like a modern gearbox, it's a little more clunky, but the manual gearbox models certainly sell and hold their value a lot better than the SMG gearboxes. So the SMG gearboxes are a controversial gearbox and a lot of people just hate them. They're perhaps not as bad as everybody makes out. They're just a little clunky. Between gears and driving around slowly, you'll feel lurchiness. But there are ways of driving those gearboxes to get rid of that lurchiness. But for sure, these days people want the manual gearbox. And just to show you the difference in performance, we might have a little drag race against my car. The owner of this car is driving my car, so I'll convince him to have a drag race. Manual versus manual, 3 litre versus 3 litre. It's just a little question of some turbochargers in my car. It's just another drag race I'm going to lose, unfortunately, but be interesting. My modern Porsche 911 against this 2005 M3. we'll give it a try. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go! For some reason I'm kicking his ass. Something's very wrong here. I don't think he's driving my car properly. I kicked his ass. Okay, from second gear. Right, 3, 2, 1, go! I don't think he was driving that Porsche too hard. But as you can see, this car's got some balls. Sort of keeps up with a modern sports car. And just as much fun to drive, you know. You really have to push this car to get the performance out of it. And it sounds so great as you're pushing it through those revs. You know, 8,000 RPM, it always sounds awesome in any sports car. So I wanted to take a quick look around the interior and the engine before we give this car back. The engine's nothing much to see. This one's been pretty well looked after by the looks of things. Interesting thing about under the engine bay is there's a big hole here where the battery normally goes in the regular models. But of course in the M models they put the battery in the back. Onto the inside, you know, for a 20-year-old design, as I said, it's not too bad. It still looks pretty modern. This is the navigation head unit, which I think looks better than the standard just radio system they had back then. Obviously it's a little dated for a system back in the early 2000s, but it still works nice and I think it still looks nice. Of course, here's that sport button I was talking about, which doesn't actually give the car any extra power, it's just the throttle mapping. But you notice instantly that the car seems to add more power because the throttle comes in sooner when you press that button. But otherwise it's all classic BMW stuff from the early 2000s. And of course, this being an M edition, you get a few M symbols around the place, and just a little bit better leather than you get in the standard models, as usual with the M series. Much nicer, softer leather. But this is a genuine 4-seater car with a decent trunk in the back that at the time was an incredible performer. I've always liked the BMW steering wheels, the fat, thick steering wheels. With the M stitching around here, and the dials, of course. The dials really make it. You know, these are pretty timeless dials with just the information you need. And of course, this is the first M3 with the variable rev limiter on it, depending on how warm the engine is. And the seats have got some decent bolsters on them. Not as supportive as the modern M3 and M4, but still pretty good. And they have held up pretty well considering the age of this car. And of course, unlike my car, it's got a real handbrake. Pretty awesome. No M button on this model though. That came in the E90. Oh, hello Tui. What do you think of this M3? Pretty cool, huh? So that's it for the E46 M3, a car I've always admired and was so jealous of back in the early 2000s. Still a very cool car today. Certainly worth considering if you're in the market for an M car at around the $20,000 mark. Thanks for watching everyone. We'll see you in the next video. Bye then.